There are nights that mark you forever. Nights that tear through the years of silence you thought would keep you safe. For me, that night came one December evening, inside Vivian Clark's parents' mansion in Georgetown. The chandeliers glittered like frozen stars above the table, and the air smelled of cinnamon, candle wax, and quiet judgment. Vivian's family, the Clarks, were people who spoke softly but carried the kind of wealth that made others lower their voices around them. Daniel and I had been invited to their annual holiday dinner, though I had the distinct feeling I was there for decoration, not inclusion. I was 61, a retired librarian from Baltimore, a widow for more than a decade. My cardigan smelled faintly of lavender, and my shoes were the same ones I'd worn for years. I had brought a bottle of homemade cranberry wine as a gift. Vivian barely looked at it before handing it to the maid. Everything was polished, perfection, crystal, silver, the slow laughter of people who have never known debt. And then, without warning, Daniel turned to me. His voice was light, playful to the others, but I saw the cruelty tucked behind his smile. "Tell me, Mom," he said, raising his glass. "How does it feel to finally have nothing left to do? No work, no purpose, completely useless?" The laughter died like a candle snuffed out by wind. Even Vivian's sisters stopped mid-sip. I smiled, a small, trembling thing that felt like the last defense of my dignity. Then, in the calmest tone I could manage, I said, "It feels like never having to pay your rent again." Daniel froze, the smile on his face curdled into shock. Vivian blinked, wine catching in her throat. "What rent?" she snapped. "What are you talking about?" I met her eyes. "The one I've been paying for 6 years." You could hear the forks clink against fine china as the silence fell heavy. Daniel's jaw slackened. Vivian's mother stared at me as though I'd just confessed to a crime. And maybe, in a way, I had, because silence is its own form of crime. 6 years I had kept that secret, believing I was protecting my son's pride. 6 years of sending $1,000 from my pension each month so that Daniel could afford the apartment Vivian wanted in downtown D.C. 6 years of watching him build a life of glass and mirrors, polished on the outside, hollow within. But in that moment, under the light of the chandeliers, my silence broke like thin ice under my feet. I didn't mean to reveal it. It just slipped out, like the truth always does when the soul finally tires of carrying it. Vivian's father cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Eleanor," he said with a polite smile that wasn't quite polite, "surely there's some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I replied. My voice shook, but I didn't look away. "I paid their rent every month for 6 years. My son asked me to. He told me it would only be for a year." Daniel's hands clenched around his glass. "Mom, please." But the dam was open now, and there was no stopping it. 1 year turned into 2, 2 into 6. I thought I was helping you build a life. I didn't realize I was funding your illusion. Vivian pushed back her chair so abruptly that the sound echoed across the marble floor. "You've been lying to me?" she hissed at Daniel. "All these years? You made me think—" "I did it for us," Daniel said, but his voice was already drowned in the rising storm of her outrage. And I stood there, silent again, but not from shame this time. For the first time in years, I felt something stronger than guilt relief. The truth had burned its way out of me, and in its ashes, I could finally breathe. As Vivian shouted and Daniel stumbled through excuses, I stared at my trembling hands. They were old hands, lined with years of care and compromise. But in that moment, they didn't feel weak. They felt free. Sometimes, love makes us foolish. Sometimes, silence turns us into ghosts in our own stories. And sometimes, one night, one cruel question becomes the key that finally unlocks the cage. Have you ever loved someone who used your kindness against you? Tell me your story in the comments. I want to read it. Because the night Daniel humiliated me wasn't the night my world ended. It was the night I began to take it back, to understand how that night came to be the glittering humiliation, the breaking point you have to go back decades. Back to a smaller house on Maple Avenue in Baltimore, with ivy creeping up its brick walls and an oak tree that shaded the porch like a guardian. That house was where everything began and, in some ways, where everything ended. I was 28 when my husband, Samuel, died. A heart attack, sudden and silent, right in the library where we both worked. Daniel was only 8. He stood in the hallway, clutching a schoolbook, staring at the paramedics like he was watching a scene he couldn't understand. That night, after the funeral, he didn't cry. He just crawled into my bed, wrapped his small fingers around my hand, and whispered, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of you now." And somehow, I believed him. That promise, so innocent, so absolute, became the thread that stitched together the torn fabric of my life. In those early years, we didn't have much, but what we had was ours. I worked double shifts at the library, shelving books, running community programs, tutoring after hours just to make sure Daniel could attend a decent school. He was a bright boy, curious and kind, with a love for astronomy. We would sit in the backyard with an old telescope and search for Jupiter, naming stars as if claiming them could bring us closer to heaven. He used to tell me, "When I grow up, I'll buy you a house by the sea so you can read all day." And I'd laugh, brushing his hair away. "I'll hold you to that, Danny." Years passed in a quiet rhythm of survival. When he was accepted into Johns Hopkins on a scholarship, I cried in the kitchen, holding his acceptance letter like a medal of honor. That night, I made his favorite dinner, baked salmon and mashed potatoes, and we sat under the oak tree with fairy lights twinkling overhead. "You did it, Danny," I told him. "You made your father proud." He smiled then, that same crooked smile he had as a boy. "You made me who I am, Mom." Those words became my anchor for years. Every sacrifice, every missed vacation, every extra shift at the library felt justified because I thought I was investing in his goodness. After graduation, he landed a solid job at a software company in D.C. He came home every Sunday for dinner, sometimes bringing me small gifts, a new mug, a scarf, a book about space. It was our ritual: coffee, laughter, and stories beneath the oak. And then, one Sunday, he told me he had met someone. "Vivian Clark," he said, smiling in a way that was both proud and nervous. "She's incredible, Mom. Confident, smart, beautiful. Her family's in real estate, they're pretty well off." Something in his voice faltered when he said that last part. I should have noticed. A mother always feels when her child begins to measure his worth against the world's standards. When I first met Vivian, I wanted to like her. She was polite, well-dressed, with perfect nails and the scent of expensive perfume. But there was something in her eyes, an invisible tape measure assessing the value of everything around her. The embroidered curtains I'd made years ago, the mismatched china from my grandmother, even the old oak tree visible through the kitchen window. She smiled sweetly and said, "Your home feels quaint. It's got such an authentic charm." Authentic. The word stung. Daniel didn't notice the venom under the sugar. That night, when she left, I tried to hide my unease. But as we washed dishes together, I asked softly, "She's different from us, isn't she?" He looked at me, defensive. "Different isn't bad, Mom." "No," I said, "it's not. As long as you don't lose yourself trying to fit into her world." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. A few weeks later, he told me they were getting married. They would live in Georgetown, near her family, in an apartment she'd already fallen in love with. He spoke fast, excited, almost rehearsed. "It's perfect, Mom. 2 bedrooms, a balcony, close to everything. We'll finally live the life we've always dreamed of." And I felt proud until he paused, fiddled with his hands, and said, "But I need to ask you for something." That was the moment, the first crack in the glass. He sat with me under the oak tree, the same place he once promised to take care of me. Only now, the roles had shifted. "I can pay most of the rent," he said, "but not all. It's just 1,000 short. I just need a little help just for a year. I'll pay you back." My heart wanted to say no. My head wanted to scream. But a mother's love is louder than both. "Just for a year?" I asked. He nodded quickly, relieved. "Of course, Danny," I said, "just 1 year." That night, I made the first payment. And though the transaction was quiet, I could almost hear something inside me breaking, a small, steady crack that would take 6 long years to reach the surface. It's strange how easily a secret can become part of your life, how quickly something meant to be temporary settles into routine. That first year of helping Daniel was supposed to be manageable. I told myself I could live with less. $1,000 a month was steep, but I convinced myself it was love, not sacrifice. Every first of the month, I'd walk to the local bank on Charles Street with my worn purse and transfer the money to his account. The tellers knew me by name. Helping your son again, Mrs. Hayes? One of them would ask kindly. Yes, I'd say, smiling as if it were a privilege. Just helping him get started. But the truth was heavier. I stopped buying fresh flowers for the kitchen table. I stopped going to the Saturday book club I loved because the bus fare added up. My arthritis medicine became optional, something to refill only when the pain became unbearable. Daniel always promised to pay me back soon. He'd call occasionally, his voice bright and distracted. You're a lifesaver, Mom. Vivian loves the new place. She says it finally feels like home. Home? I'd repeat, forcing a laugh. That's wonderful, sweetheart. But each time, the word twisted like a knife. Because it wasn't my home, it was my money building someone else's comfort. Their apartment was in one of those new glass towers near the river floor-to-ceiling windows, rooftop garden, concierge service. I'd seen it once, in photos Vivian posted online. In every picture, she looked radiant, Daniel polished. Together, they looked like a magazine couple living the dream. I told myself it was worth it if he was happy. I told myself mothers are supposed to give until it hurts. Then came their first wedding anniversary. I hadn't heard from them in weeks, so I baked Daniel's favorite apple pie and decided to surprise him. The elevator ride up to their floor felt endless. I stood in front of their door, clutching the warm pie, and rang the bell. Vivian answered, barefoot in a silk robe, her hair immaculate even at home. She looked startled, then irritated. Oh, Eleanor, what a surprise. Happy anniversary, I said, smiling. I thought I'd bring you something sweet. She didn't move to invite me in. Daniel's not home. He's at a client dinner. Oh, I can leave it for him. No, it's fine. We don't really eat pie. Her lips curved into a polite smile that wasn't polite at all. Next time, just text first, okay? She closed the door gently, almost kindly. And that somehow made it worse. I stood there for a long moment in the hallway, holding the pie that still smelled of cinnamon and hope. When I finally turned away, a neighbor passed by and smiled. Lovely building, she said. You visiting family? I nodded, though my throat was tight. Something like that. I took the train home that night. The pie sat on my lap the entire ride, untouched. I ate a slice in my kitchen under the yellow light, and the crust tasted like salt instead of sugar. The months rolled by, and I kept paying. 1 year turned into 2. The conversations with Daniel became shorter, his visits rarer. He began speaking with a tone I didn't recognize, brisk, transactional, as though I were one of his clients. Hey, Mom, just checking if the transfer went through? Thanks again. No. How are you? No. Do you need anything? Once, I gathered the courage to ask, when will you stop needing help, Danny? He sighed, frustrated. Soon, Mom. Vivian's planning to go back to work after her certification program. Just hang in there. Hang in there. As if I were dangling from a cliff, and he didn't notice I was the one holding him up. By the 3rd year, my savings had vanished. The pension barely covered my bills. The oak tree outside had grown wild, its branches brushing the windows like fingers reminding me I hadn't trimmed it in years. Sometimes, I'd sit under it and talk to my late husband as if he could hear me. Sam, I'm doing my best. He's a good boy. He just needs time. But I was lying to him, to myself, to the quiet air that no longer believed me. One afternoon, Daniel called. His tone was cheerful, even excited. Mom, good news. Vivian and I are thinking of upgrading to a bigger place. I nearly dropped the phone. Bigger? Daniel? That sounds expensive. It's fine, he said quickly. I just got a raise, and I'll cover most of it. I just might need a little help at first, maybe $2,000 this time, but just for a few months. Something inside me went cold. Daniel? No. I can't. Please, Mom, he interrupted. Vivian already told her parents. We've shown them photos. It'll be humiliating if we don't follow through. Humiliation. The word echoed. When had he started worrying more about appearances than about truth? That night, I opened my bank book. The balance stared back at me, merciless and small. I realized that if I continued, I'd lose not only my savings but myself. And yet, when the first of the month came, I made the transfer again, because that's what mothers do, we hold on, even when it's killing us. By the end of year 4, my body began to rebel. My knees screamed with pain. I stopped buying new shoes. I fixed my leaking faucet myself with duct tape and prayer. The oak tree outside dropped its leaves early that fall, its branches bare and brittle. It looked like how I felt, stripped down, clinging to what little remained. I often lay awake at night, asking the same question over and over. When did love become this kind of suffering? But the answer never came because I already knew. It came the day I said yes under that oak tree. There's a moment in every mother's life when she realizes the child she raised no longer sees her as a person, just as a function. For me, that realization came one icy February morning when Daniel called me not to ask how I was, but to remind me the transfer hadn't gone through. "Mom, it's the third already," he said, voice tight with annoyance. "I know, Danny," I said, clutching the phone with cold hands. "I'll go to the bank this afternoon. You can do it online, you know. It's 2022, not 1980. I prefer to go in person." A sigh, impatient, heavy. "Fine, just make sure it's done today. The landlord's waiting." The landlord. Not his mother. The landlord. I hung up, staring at the screen long after the call ended. The silence in the house felt louder than his voice. Outside, the wind whipped against the windows, and the oak tree groaned beneath its weight. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heartbeat not strong, not weak, just tired. At the bank, the teller smiled as always. "Same account, Mrs. Hayes?" "Yes," I murmured. "Same account." It was always the same account. That night, I sat down with my ledger. I had recorded every payment since the beginning, each transfer dated and initialed, as if that made it less painful. The total stared back at me. $48,000. $48,000 I could have used to fix the roof, to buy hearing aids, to travel, to live. Instead, it had vanished into a silence that had no gratitude in return. The pain in my knees had worsened. My doctor said I needed physical therapy, $300 a month, not covered by insurance. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't need to think. I already knew I couldn't afford it. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen, looking at the bottles of pills lined up beside the sink. I had to choose: medicine or mortgage, heat or pride. I chose pride. It was the only thing I had left that was still mine. Months later, Daniel came to visit alone, for once. He looked restless, eyes darting, fingers tapping the table. "I have good news," he said. "We're buying a car. My stomach sank." Atsar? An SUV. Vivian says it's safer, and we'll need it when we start a family. The dealership is giving us a good deal. I just need help with the down payment, $4,000. Just a loan, Mom. I swear I'll pay you back in 6 months. I stared at him, the words catching in my throat. "Danny, I don't have that kind of money." "You do," he said, smiling, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "You still have Dad's savings account, don't you? The one with the 20,000? The air left my lungs. That account wasn't for spending. It was the last piece of Samuel I had. It was meant for my old age, for emergencies, for dignity. "That money's off limits," I said quietly. He frowned, his charm slipping. "Mom, come on. I'm your son. Dad would want you to help me." "No, he wouldn't. He'd want you to stand on your own 2 feet. Daniel's tone hardened. "You're being dramatic. It's not forever." "Neither is self-respect," I snapped before I could stop myself. He blinked, surprised. I had never raised my voice to him before. "I'll think about it," I said, ending the conversation. For 3 days, I didn't sleep. I sat under the oak tree, clutching my late husband's photo, whispering, "What would you do, Sam? Would you want me to protect him or protect what's left of me?" The answer came in the form of silence, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore but clarifies. When Daniel called again, I said no. He hung up without saying goodbye. 2 weeks later, I saw Vivian's Instagram post a smiling selfie beside a new silver Lexus. The caption read, "Grateful for my hard-working husband and the life we're building together." Dozens of comments. "Couple goals. So blessed. You two deserve it." I felt the tears come before I could stop them. They'd bought the car anyway without me, without my $4,000, without my consent, which meant Daniel hadn't needed me. He'd only wanted to test the limits of my love. That night, I didn't cry for the money. I cried for every lie I'd chosen to believe, for every quiet evening I'd spent thinking I was helping him, for every time I'd said, "It's only for now," and then kept paying anyway. I made myself tea and sat beneath the oak tree. The branches were bare that winter, but under the streetlight, they still cast soft shadows that looked like hands reaching upward. And I realized something. I wasn't the victim of Daniel's greed. I was the architect of my own silence. I could have said no 6 years ago. I could have drawn the line the first time he lied. But I hadn't, because love, when twisted by guilt, becomes servitude. The next morning, I took a notebook and wrote down everything, every payment, every broken promise, every humiliation I'd swallowed. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming the truth. When I looked at the total again, now $54,000, a strange calm filled me. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I was beginning to wake up. The 5th year of paying Daniel's rent began with an omen, though I didn't recognize it then. The oak tree outside my window, my companion through every season, began to wither from one side. The leaves turned brittle early that spring, their veins darkening before they fell. The arborist I called said it was root rot. I almost laughed at the irony. Roots decaying beneath something that still looked alive. That was my life in one sentence. By then, my body had started to fail me. The arthritis had spread from my knees to my hands. Some mornings I couldn't even hold a teacup without trembling. When I mentioned it to Daniel, he said, "You really should take better care of yourself, Mom. Have you tried yoga?" Yoga. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him I'd had to cancel my physical therapy because of the $1,000 help I gave him every month. But I didn't. I smiled and said, "I'll look into it." I had become a ghost that nodded. That summer, my old friend Martha invited me to join a small group trip to Savannah. 4 days, all inclusive, she said excitedly over coffee. $1,200 total. We'll walk the historic district, eat seafood by the water. It'll be good for you. I smiled, my heart aching. That sounds wonderful. So, you'll come? I can't. Maybe next year. Eleanor, she said, her eyes narrowing. You've been saying that for years. I shrugged. Money's tight. You're retired, not destitute. You paid off your house, didn't you? Where does it all go? I froze, hands tightening around my cup. She saw it, the flicker of guilt across my face. Eleanor, she whispered. What are you not telling me? I looked away. It's nothing. Nothing doesn't make a woman give up her joy. Her words lodged in my chest. That night, as the rain tapped against the windows, I sat at my kitchen table and allowed myself to think about the truth. I was living like a pauper, so my son could live like a prince. It wasn't just money he was taking, it was pieces of my life. I stopped buying novels because paperbacks felt indulgent. I stopped buying fresh fruit because it spoiled too quickly. Even the light bulbs in my living room were dimmer. I'd replace them with cheaper ones that flickered, bathing everything in half-light. Every morning, I woke to the sound of the oak's dry branches scraping the window pane. It was like hearing the earth whisper, enough. Then came Mother's Day. I had spent 2 days preparing for it. My hands ached from peeling and chopping, but I made Daniel's favorite roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. I set the table with my grandmother's china and placed yellow tulips in the center. At 1:30, I texted him, "Everything's ready, darling. Drive safe." He replied, "On our way. Vivian's just finishing her hair." By 3, the chicken was cold. By 4, the tulips had started to wilt. By 5, the phone rang. "Mom," Daniel said breathlessly. "Vivian's parents organized a last-minute brunch." I couldn't say no. "I'll come next weekend, okay? Love you." He hung up before I could answer. I sat there, staring at the untouched table. The smell of rosemary filled the air, sharp and bitter. I poured myself a glass of wine, the same cranberry wine I'd once proudly gifted to Vivian's family. It burned going down. I thought of all the years I'd spent teaching Daniel about honesty, kindness, respect. And I realized, with a dull ache, that none of it had taken root. When I finally stood up, I scraped the chicken into the trash. The sound was louder than I expected. Then I blew out the candles I'd lit for a celebration that never came. The following week, Daniel arrived with flowers store-bought, perfunctory, and a box of chocolates I couldn't eat because of my medication. "Sorry, Mom," he said with his easy smile. "You know how Vivian's family is. They plan things last minute." I nodded, pretending it was fine. Because mothers do that, we pretend. But something had shifted. A small fracture had widened into a fault line. That night, I took out my ledger again. 5 years, 60 payments, $60,000. I whispered the number aloud, as if hearing it would make it real. 60,000, I said again, and then again, until it stopped sounding like money and started sounding like time. That's what I'd given him, time I could never get back. 5 years of Sundays alone. 5 years of saying yes when I wanted to say no. 5 years of letting guilt dress itself as love. I don't know what made me do it, maybe the exhaustion, maybe Martha's voice in my head, but the next morning, I opened my laptop and searched the building where Daniel and Vivian lived. There it was, listed online. 2-bedroom units starting at $2,200 per month. Not $3,200. Not $3,000. 2,200美元. My breath caught, my vision blurred. Had I really been giving him nearly half of a rent that didn't exist? I sat there for hours, staring at the screen, shaking. The betrayal was almost physical. It crawled up my throat and sat heavy in my chest. Daniel hadn't just lied to me. He had watched me struggle, watched me limp, watched me cancel the things that made me happy, knowing exactly what it cost me, and he had still taken more. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat under the oak tree in the backyard, its half-dead branches reaching toward the stars, like a question I couldn't answer. The truth was a bitter taste in my mouth, and yet, it was also the first thing in years that felt real. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't enough to know the truth. I had to make him face it. The morning I decided to confront Daniel, the sky was gray, the kind of gray that feels like waiting for something to break. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't need to. My stomach was already filled with 6 years' worth of swallowed words. For the first time in all those years, I didn't make the rent transfer on the first. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear anymore, it was clarity. By noon, my phone began to buzz. Daniel. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom, the rent hasn't gone through," he said, his tone clipped. "I know. You forgot again?" I didn't forget. A pause, then sharper. "So what's going on?" "I think we need to talk in person," I said. "Come by tonight." "Mom, I'm busy. Just tell me what's wrong." "Come," I repeated, my voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. "Or there won't be any rent. Not this month. Not any month." The silence that followed was long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. "Finally," he sighed. "Fine. I'll come after work." I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing not food, not coffee, but evidence. Every bank statement, every note from my ledger, every check stub. I laid them out across the kitchen table like crime scene photographs. Because that's what it was now, a crime. Not against law, but against love. At 8:15, headlights flashed through the window. I heard his car door slam, then the front door creak open. "Mom?" he called, walking in with his coat still on. "What's the emergency?" I didn't answer right away. He stopped short when he saw the papers on the table. "What is all this?" I looked him straight in the eyes. 6 years of my life. He frowned. "You're not making sense." I tapped one of the statements. "Every month, on the 1st, I sent you $1,000. I've recorded every payment. You told me the rent was $3,000, that you paid $2,000, and I helped with $1,000. But I checked, Daniel. 2-bedroom units in your building are $2,200, not $3,000. His face went pale. "Mom, you don't know what you're talking about." "I went there," I interrupted. "I asked the doorman myself." The silence that followed was deafening. "Why would you do that?" he snapped finally. "You embarrassed me." "I embarrassed you? You've been taking my money for years, lying about how much you pay, while I've been choosing between heat and medicine." He flinched, the words hitting like stones. "Mom, you don't understand," he said quickly. "Vivian, she expects a certain life. If she knew—" "She does know," I said sharply. "Don't tell me she doesn't. No one buys designer handbags on your salary and doesn't ask where the extra money comes from." He looked away, jaw tightening. That was my answer. My chest ached, but I kept going. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it's been? I've been living like a beggar to fund your performance. You made me invisible, Daniel." "Don't exaggerate," he said. "You offered to help." "I offered to help for 1 year, not to bankroll your marriage. I planned to pay you back." "With what? More lies?" His voice broke then. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted Vivian to see me as successful. You always said Dad was proud of me." "Don't bring your father into this," I snapped. "He was proud because you were honest, not because you knew how to fake success." He sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair. For the first time, he looked small like the boy who used to fall asleep under the oak tree after late-night stargazing. I softened, just a little. Danny, you could have told me you were struggling. I would have helped in other ways. I would have stood by you. But you didn't just take my money, you took my trust. He stared at his hands. What do you want me to do? Tell her the truth. His head jerked up. What? Tell Vivian that your mother has been paying part of your rent for 6 years. That the apartment, the vacations, the image, it's all been built on my sacrifice. He laughed nervously. Mom, you can't be serious. She'll leave me. Then let her. Do you want me to lose everything? You already have, I whispered. You just don't know it yet. He stood up, pacing. You don't understand how she is. Her parents. I don't care about her parents, I cut in. I care about my son, the one who used to make me coffee on Sundays, the one who promised to take care of me, the one I don't recognize anymore. Mom, his voice cracked, the first crack in 6 years. I'll fix this. I'll pay you back. Just give me time. I looked at him, and for a brief second, I saw the little boy he used to be. But the years of silence had made that vision blur. You can't pay back time, I said. He didn't answer. Finally, he grabbed his coat. I'll talk to Vivian, he said, though his tone was hollow. But if she leaves, that's on you. No, Daniel, I said quietly. That's on the truth. The door shut behind him with a heavy click. For the first time in years, I didn't cry. I stood in the silence, surrounded by the proof of everything I'd given, and I felt something foreign rising inside me. Not rage, not regret. Power, the kind that comes when you finally stop apologizing for being right. That night, I slept without the pain of guilt pressing on my chest. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the window. The oak tree outside was still half dead, but I noticed something small, tiny green shoots sprouting from one of the bare branches. I smiled. It was still alive. So was I. For 3 days after that confrontation, my house was silent. The phone didn't ring. The mailbox stayed empty. Even the oak tree seemed to be holding its breath. I thought I'd feel regret. Guilt, maybe. That I'd gone too far, said too much. But I didn't. I felt light. For the first time in years, I didn't owe anyone anything. And yet, I couldn't shake the unease, the kind of silence that hides before a storm. On the 4th day, Daniel finally texted. Mom, I told her. We need to talk. I didn't reply. He showed up that evening anyway. I heard his car pull into the driveway, slow and cautious, like he wasn't sure what waited for him inside. When I opened the door, he stood there with his hands in his pockets, eyes bloodshot, hair uncombed. He looked older, smaller. Can I come in? He asked. I nodded, stepping aside. He sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I had laid out the evidence of his betrayal, and stared at the floor. I told Vivian everything, he said finally. About the rent, about the money, about you. And she was furious. His voice cracked. Not because of the lie, because of the embarrassment. She said I made her look foolish in front of her family, that I destroyed her trust. He ran a hand through his hair. She left, Mom, packed a bag and went to her parents' house. I poured tea in silence. Then she did you a favor. He looked up sharply. A favor? She's my wife. Then she should have been your partner, I said, not your audience. He looked at me like I'd spoken another language. You don't understand how much she means to me. I do, I said softly. I just don't think she ever meant that much to you. He didn't respond. He stared at his hands again, the same way he did as a child when he was caught lying about breaking something precious. Finally, he whispered, she said I married beneath her. I took a slow sip of my tea. Then she proved she never deserved you. That night, I watched him unravel. He told me how Vivian had known more than she'd pretended to, that she'd suspected for years he wasn't earning as much as she thought, but chose to ignore it because the lie served her image, too. She said she'd rather believe the version of me that looked good in photos, he muttered bitterly. There was something tragic about it. The boy who once stared at stars, now trapped in the reflection of a camera lens. She's not coming back, he said, almost to himself. She told her parents everything. They called me a con artist. I wanted to comfort him, but part of me couldn't. He had built this house of cards, and now it was collapsing, one lie at a time. I lost everything, he said. My marriage, my reputation, my friends. No, I said quietly. You lost what wasn't real. What's left, that's what matters. He looked up, eyes shining with unshed tears. You still think there's anything left? Yes, I said. Yourself. That's a start. He shook his head. You should hate me. I did, I admitted. For about 10 minutes. Then I remembered who raised you. I won't hate what I helped create, but I won't fund it anymore either. He nodded slowly. I get it. When he left that night, I didn't follow him to the door. I watched from the window as he sat in his car for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, forehead resting against it. Something in me wanted to run outside, tell him it was going to be okay. But I stayed where I was, because I knew that if I rescued him again, he'd never learn how to swim. The next day, Martha came over. So, she said, settling into the armchair, you finally did it. I did. And? He told her the truth. She left him. Martha's smile was small but knowing. Good. Lies always travel faster than truth, but truth is the one that never loses its way home. I laughed softly. You always sound like a sermon. That's because I've lived long enough to know better, she said, sipping her coffee. So, what will you do now? I looked out the window at the oak tree. I'll live, I said simply. For myself this time. For the first time in years, I allowed myself small luxuries. I bought good coffee, replaced the flickering bulbs in my living room, painted the front porch a warm shade of yellow. I walked with my cane through the park and felt the spring air on my face. I even booked a trip to Savannah with Martha. Just the act of pressing confirm on the ticket felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost somewhere between guilt and love. But life, in its cruel balance, wasn't done teaching me yet. A week before the trip, I received an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar. Mrs. Hayes? A woman's voice said. This is Clara Clark, Vivian's sister. My heart tightened. Yes? I know you don't owe me anything, she said hesitantly. But I think you deserve to hear the truth. The truth about what? About Vivian and the rent. The air around me seemed to still. She knew, Mrs. Hayes, Clara said softly. She knew for years. At first I didn't respond. My throat closed up. How do you know that? I managed to whisper. Because she told me, Clara said. At a dinner 2 years ago, she was laughing about how her husband's mother helped out with the rent. She said, and I quote, "It's the least that woman can do. After everything Daniel does for her." The words hit harder than any insult Daniel had ever said. The least I could do. She acted like it was normal, Clara continued, like she was entitled to your sacrifice. My vision blurred. And Daniel never knew you heard that? No. But when he told her the truth last week, she pretended to be shocked. She's been lying to him and to you this whole time. I sat in silence, my heart pounding. I just thought you should know, Clara said softly. You don't deserve the way they treated you. When the call ended, I didn't move for a long time. I just stared out the window, watching the wind move through the oak branches. I'd spent years thinking I was protecting my son from Vivian's judgment, but the truth was worse than I'd imagined. She had known all along and played the saint while I carried the shame. The betrayal wasn't just Daniel's anymore, it was theirs. And I knew exactly what I needed to do next. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the quiet glow of the porch, the soft hum of crickets rising from the yard, the oak tree swaying against the pale moonlight. Clara's words kept looping in my mind. She knew all along. For years, I'd pictured Vivian as oblivious, a spoiled woman whose ignorance was her only sin. But knowing she had accepted my money with full awareness, with amusement, even that shifted something inside me. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was awakening. I realized I had been living like a woman buried alive, pounding on the coffin lid, praying someone outside would hear. But the people I loved most were the ones holding the nails in place. By midnight, I turned on my old desk lamp and took out a sheet of stationery, the kind I used to write Daniel letters when he was in college. The paper smelled faintly of dust and lavender. I stared at the blank page until my tears stopped and my hand steadied. Then I began to write. Dear Daniel, you were 8 when you told me you'd take care of me someday. You were standing in front of our old oak tree, holding your father's watch in your small hand, and I remember thinking, he's a good boy. I was right then. But I don't know that boy anymore. You see, somewhere along the way, the man you became confused, pried with dignity, and love with obligation. You've been living in a house of lies, and I've been paying the rent on it not just with money, but with my health, my peace, and my self-respect. For 6 years, I allowed this. I made excuses for you, telling myself a mother's silence was an act of love. But silence isn't love, Daniel. It's complicity. And I won't be complicit anymore. I know now that Vivian knew about the money. She's known for years. And the two of you let me believe my sacrifice was a secret worth keeping. That's the part I can't forgive, not the lie itself, but the way you made me invisible inside it. So I'm ending this cycle. I'm not angry, and I'm not asking for anything, not an apology, not repayment, not pity. I only ask that you remember who I was before I became your convenience. When you find that version of me again, when you're ready to know your mother as a person and not a purse, my door will be open. But until then, Daniel, this is goodbye, not forever, but for now. Love, Mom. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it with trembling hands. It felt final, sacred, like lowering a curtain after the last act of a long, tragic play. The next morning, I dressed neatly, brushed my hair, and took the train to Washington. It had been years since I'd been in that part of the city. Everything was polished, steel and glass, the air thick with ambition. The building where Daniel lived looked taller than I remembered, gleaming, sterile, impersonal. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. I simply slipped the letter into their mailbox and whispered, "Let truth do the rest." Then I walked away. On the train ride home, I felt a strange lightness, as if I had left not just an envelope behind, but an entire version of myself. When I reached my stop, the sky had begun to clear. The oak tree, the one I'd feared would die, was sprouting new buds at its tips, tiny, defiant signs of life. I sat beneath it and breathed deeply. For once, my house didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. 2 weeks later, Daniel called. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, the mother that never dies, completely made me pick up. "Mom," he said, his voice rough, unfamiliar. "I got your letter." I said nothing. He exhaled shakily. "You were right about everything." Was I? I told Vivian again, this time without excuses. I told her the truth, the whole truth, about the money, the lies, the rent. And she's gone. For good. Her parents told her to file for separation. I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry, Danny." "I'm not," he said quietly. "For the first time in years, I can breathe." We were both silent then. Finally, I asked, "So what will you do now?" I moved into a smaller apartment, sold the car, canceled the gym, the fancy dinners. I'm working extra hours to pay off debts I didn't even realize I'd made. It's humbling. There was sincerity in his tone, a quiet exhaustion that wasn't performance. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I just want you to know I'm trying." "You don't have to ask," I said softly. "Forgiveness isn't for you, it's for me, and I already did." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Mom, I used to think you were weak because you never said no. Now I know it takes more strength to walk away than to hold on." Tears welled in my eyes. I didn't walk away, Daniel. I finally stood up. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. No more half dreams of unpaid bills or phantom phone calls. Just Kiat. Real, earned Kiat. The next morning, the sunlight spilled through my curtains and fell on the letter paper still left on my desk. I thought of writing again, but not to Daniel. This time, I wrote a note to myself. "You are not invisible. You never were. You were just waiting to be seen by the one person who mattered, yourself." I folded it and placed it inside the drawer beside my wedding ring. For the first time, in a long time, both felt like symbols of peace, not loss. That day, I called Martha. "You were right," I said. "The truth doesn't destroy, it disinfects." She laughed softly. "So, when do we leave for Savannah?" "Soon," I said, smiling. "But this time, I'm buying the good seats." The Savannah trip was supposed to be a small escape, a short holiday of laughter, food, and river breeze. But for me, it became a pilgrimage, a quiet crossing from the life I had endured to the life I was finally claiming. When Martha and I arrived, the city smelled of salt and magnolia. Cobblestone streets shimmered with the soft glow of old lanterns, and strangers smiled like they knew your story, even if you hadn't told it yet. On our second evening there, we sat by the riverfront, watching the boats drift past in the fading light. Martha leaned back in her chair, sipping sweet tea. "You look different," she said, squinting at me. "Older?" "No, lighter. Like someone who finally put down a bag she's been carrying too long." I smiled. "Maybe I have." We talked for hours about books, the past, the future. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about Daniel, about bills, about secrets. I laughed freely, loudly even. And when the night air cooled, I looked out over the water and whispered to myself, "You did it. You let go." When I returned home, the house felt different. Not larger, not emptier, but alive. The yellow paint on the porch gleamed under the summer sun, and the oak tree had recovered. Its branches were green again, lush and forgiving. I placed my suitcase by the door and whispered, "We made it, old friend." A week later, Daniel visited. He looked nervous, like a schoolboy about to confess something. His shoulders had slumped, but his eyes were softer than I'd seen in years. He handed me a small envelope. "Just open it, Mom." Inside was a check, $1,000. "What is this?" "The first payment," he said. "I know I'll never be able to repay everything, but I want to start. You don't have to accept it, but I need to give it." I stared at the paper, then at him. "Daniel, forgiveness doesn't need interest." "I know," he said quietly, "but redemption does." He didn't stay long that day, just long enough to fix the creaky cabinet door I'd been ignoring and make me a cup of tea before heading home. And yet, when the door closed behind him, the silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Over the next few months, small things began to change. Daniel called regularly, not to ask for money, not to complain, but simply to talk. Sometimes he told me about work. Other times, about the quiet evenings he spent alone, cooking for himself. He said he'd started therapy. "I realized I was chasing approval I never needed," he admitted one evening. I listened, proud but quiet. Healing doesn't need applause. It just needs space to breathe. Then, one afternoon, he said something unexpected. "I've been seeing someone." I smiled gently. "Oh?" "Her name's Amelia. She's a teacher. Teaches third grade at a public school near my office. She sounds lovely." "She is. She's simple. Not simple-minded, simple-hearted. Real. She doesn't care about cars or neighborhoods or designer clothes. She likes making things from scratch, reading old books, talking about kids and space and life." I laughed softly. "Sounds like she reminds you of someone." "Yeah," he said, his voice quiet. "You." I met Amelia a month later. She came to Sunday dinner with Daniel, wearing a plain blue dress and carrying a pie she'd baked herself. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, smiling shyly. "I've heard so much about you." "Good things, I hope," I said. "The best things." There was something about her unpretentious, grounded. She helped me set the table without being asked, hummed while arranging the plates, and laughed at Daniel's awful puns like they were the funniest things she'd ever heard. Watching them together, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Peace. No performance, no tension, no careful calculation of image, just two people being real. After dinner, while Daniel was washing dishes, Amelia turned to me. "I know what happened," she said softly. "Daniel told me everything." I froze. "He told you? Everything?" She nodded. "Yes. And he told me not because he wanted sympathy, but because he said he needed to live honestly now. I think that's brave." Tears pricked my eyes. "Brave and overdue." She smiled gently. "You raised him to find his way back. That's something not many mothers can say." When they left that night, I stood on the porch under the oak tree, watching their car disappear down the road. For the first time, I didn't worry about him. He was finally steering his own life, and this time, in the right direction. That night, I took the check he'd given me and slipped it into an envelope addressed to Baltimore Public School Scholarship Fund. On the memo line, I wrote, "For a child who dreams of the stars." I wanted the money to go where it should have gone all along, to hope. 2 months later, Daniel called again. "Mom," he said, his voice light, almost boyish. "Amelia and I are moving in together. It's a small apartment, but it's ours." "Yours?" I repeated, smiling. "That's a beautiful word." He chuckled. "We even found one with a little balcony. Not fancy, but she's already talking about planting herbs and hanging lights. I laughed. Just don't tell her how many nights I dreamed of you having that kind of life. He was quiet for a moment. You gave me that chance, Mom. I just didn't see it until it almost destroyed me. I gave you love, Daniel. You turned it into a lesson. That's what matters. That night, I sat under the oak tree again. The branches rustled overhead, thick with summer leaves, the air humming with life. For 6 years, that tree had witnessed everything: my sacrifices, my silence, my shame. And now, it was witnessing something new: peace. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the cool wood beneath my palms. We made it, I whispered again. And this time, I didn't mean we survived. I meant we healed. Autumn arrived with soft gold light and the smell of apples from the market. The air in Baltimore carried that crisp edge that made the mornings feel like possibility. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the change of seasons. Daniel and Amelia began visiting every Sunday without fail. No excuses. No last-minute cancellations. They'd arrive just after noon with a bag of groceries and the kind of easy laughter I used to dream about hearing again. Amelia always brought something: homemade fresh bread or soup simmered for hours, and Daniel, now with a scruff of beard and a humble calmness I'd never seen before, fixed whatever needed fixing. One afternoon, while he was tightening the hinges on the old kitchen cabinet, he said, "You know what's strange? I sleep better now. I used to wake up every night worrying about keeping up, about money, about appearances, about being enough. And now?" I asked. "Now, I wake up because Amelia steals all the covers," he said, laughing. "But that's the only thing that keeps me up." I smiled, not just because it was funny, but because it was true happiness, the simple kind that doesn't need to be proved to anyone. That winter, I hosted Christmas at my house for the first time in over a decade. Martha came, and Daniel and Amelia decorated the tree while music played softly in the background. The living room glowed with yellow light and the scent of cinnamon. When dinner was ready, Daniel raised his glass. "To truth," he said, smiling faintly. "To peace," Amelia added. I lifted mine. "And to the kind of love that doesn't require silence." We clinked glasses. For once, it didn't feel like pretending. A few months later, I heard from Clara again, Vivian's sister. Her voice was gentle but steady. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, "I just wanted to let you know. My sister has been going through therapy. She's different now. Humble, even. She lost her job last year and had to move back home for a while." "I see," I said softly. "She told me she regrets everything. She said you were right that a life built on image eventually collapses." I sat there quietly, absorbing it. Not with triumph, not with pity, but with understanding. "Tell her," I said, "that I hope she learns to forgive herself. That's the hardest part." "I will," Clara replied. After the call ended, I looked out the window at the oak tree, lush again, strong, its roots deep and unshaken. I whispered, "We all learn eventually." Spring brought more change. Daniel and Amelia got engaged. They didn't make a grand announcement or post anything online. They just came over one Sunday, sat me down under the oak, and said, "We'd like your blessing." I laughed through my tears. "You don't need my blessing. You already have my heart." Their wedding was small, just close friends, Martha, and a few of Daniel's co-workers. It was held in a little garden behind an old chapel, the kind where flowers grow through cracks in the stone walls. Amelia wore a simple cream dress, and Daniel wore a tie that didn't quite match his suit. It was perfect. When they said their vows, there were no promises of perfection, only honesty. And when they walked down the aisle hand in hand, I knew this time it was real. Afterward, during the reception, Daniel found me sitting beneath a willow tree, watching everyone dance. He crouched down beside me. "You okay, Mom?" "More than okay," I said. "You look happy." "I am," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I reached out and touched his face, just like when he was little. "I didn't raise you to be perfect, Daniel. I raised you to remember who you are when life tries to make you forget." The months that followed were quiet, peaceful. I fixed small things around the house, tended to my garden, and read the books I'd been saving for someday. That someday had finally come. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was elegant, unfamiliar. "Dear Mrs. Hayes, you probably didn't expect to hear from me. I am writing because my therapist said healing begins with truth. I've spent the last year rebuilding my life, starting from nothing. I lost my job, my status, my comfort, but in losing those things, I found something better: humility. I never thanked you for what you gave me, for what you sacrificed. I never acknowledged the kindness that made my life possible, or the dignity I took from you without realizing what it cost. I am sorry, Mrs. Hayes. I am truly, deeply sorry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted to say the words anyway. Vivian. I folded the letter and placed it beside Daniel's first repayment check in the drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger. I simply whispered, "Good. She's learning too." It wasn't revenge I had wanted. It was closure. And sometimes closure doesn't come through confrontation, it comes through grace. Later that week, Daniel and Amelia came for Sunday dinner as usual. As we cleared the dishes, Amelia hesitated. "There's something we wanted to tell you." Her cheeks flushed pink, and Daniel grinned, nervous but excited. "Mom," he said, "you're going to be a grandmother." For a moment, the world blurred. Then I laughed and cried all at once. I stood, hugged them both, feeling their warmth, their heartbeat, their future pressed against me. "Promise me one thing," I said, when I could finally speak again. "Anything," Daniel replied. "When that baby grows up, teach them the truth early. That love isn't about what you give, it's about what you honor." He nodded. "I will." That night, after they left, I sat beneath the oak tree again. The branches rustled softly in the spring wind. The moonlight filtered through like silver lace across the grass. I thought of every version of myself I'd been. The mother who gave too much. The woman who stayed silent. The one who finally spoke. The one who healed. I realized I didn't need to erase any of them. They had all led me here to peace, to wisdom, to the gentle strength that only comes from surviving what once felt unbearable. The oak above me creaked softly, its leaves whispering in the night air. I tilted my head back and smiled. I was no longer invisible. I was whole. The year my grandchild was born, the house seemed to bloom right along with us. Even the oak tree looked greener, its branches reaching farther, as if it too wanted to hold the new life that had entered our world. Amelia gave birth in late April, a baby girl named Lena Grace Hayes. The first time I held her, I felt the kind of trembling that only comes from awe. She was so tiny, her fists curled like little stars, her hair soft as milk. Daniel hovered nearby, wide-eyed, terrified, and proud all at once. "She's perfect," I whispered. "She's everything," he said softly. In that sterile hospital room, with sunlight spilling through the blinds and machines softly beeping, I saw something I had never expected to see again. A complete circle. The boy who once broke my heart with lies was now holding truth in his arms. When they brought Lena home, the apartment was small but full of love. Amelia had painted the nursery walls with pastel suns and moons. Daniel had built the crib himself, the wood sanded so smooth it gleamed like glass. On my first visit, he handed me a mug of coffee and said, "Mom, you should see how she sleeps. She makes these little noises like she's dreaming already." I smiled. "That's because she's inherited your imagination." He laughed, and for a brief moment, I saw the child he once was. The one who used to sit under our oak tree, asking me questions about the stars. It struck me then how easily love regenerates when we stop demanding perfection from it. Weeks passed. I started visiting every Friday, bringing casseroles and stories, teaching Amelia how to make the slow-simmering soup that had once been Daniel's favorite. She'd hum softly while stirring the pot, and Daniel would sit beside the crib, tapping his finger against Lena's tiny palm. Sometimes I'd catch myself just watching them in silence, afraid to breathe, afraid the peace might vanish if I looked away. But it didn't vanish. It stayed. One afternoon, Daniel joined me on the balcony, while Amelia napped with the baby. He handed me a folded envelope. "I finally closed the last account," he said. "Paid off the loans, sold the last of the furniture from the old apartment." I raised an eyebrow. "The one I used to pay for?" He nodded. "That one. It's gone now like it never existed." I took a deep breath. "Good. Some ghosts don't deserve monuments." He looked at me for a long moment before saying, "You know, sometimes I dream about that apartment. I wake up in a cold sweat thinking I still owe you money, still owe her approval." "Do you still think you owe me?" He shook his head slowly. "No. I think I owe myself better. I smiled. Then you're finally free. When I returned home that evening, I made tea and sat under the oak tree again. The moon hung low and yellow above the branches. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayals, the silence, the reckoning, and now the redemption. Life hadn't erased the pain. It had simply transformed it. Every ache had become a lesson, every loss a seed for something better. The oak had withstood storms, drought, decay, and still, it stood tall. So had I. Months passed like whispered prayers. Lena began to walk, then run, and with every wobbling step, she carried generations of mistakes rewritten as hope. One afternoon, while she toddled across my porch, she stopped, looked up at the oak tree, and pointed. "Tree," she said proudly. I laughed through tears. "Yes, my love, that's the tree, that's our tree." And in that small, perfect moment, I knew my story had come full circle. Sometimes, when the nights grow long and quiet, I reread the letter I once wrote to Daniel, the one where I said goodbye to the relationship that had broken me. I no longer read it with sadness. Now, I read it as proof of survival. Because everything that followed, every word, every wound, every act of courage, was born from that letter. That moment, I stopped being afraid to say enough. I learned that endings are not always losses. Sometimes, they are beginnings dressed in disguise. I no longer wonder whether I was a good mother. I know I was. Not because I was perfect, but because I kept showing up broken, healing, honest. And when I finally stood up for myself, I wasn't betraying my child. I was teaching him, in the hardest way possible, that love without boundaries is not love at all, it's surrender. The other day, Daniel called just to talk. No reason, no agenda. He said, "Mom, Lena asked me who taught me how to tell stories." I told her, "My mother did. She taught me that truth is the only story worth telling." My heart melted. Maybe that was the inheritance I had always meant to give him. Not money, not comfort, but truth. When I hung up, I walked outside and stood beneath the oak tree. Its leaves shimmered silver under the moonlight, whispering the same rhythm they always had. I reached out, touched its trunk, and whispered back, "We did it." And somewhere deep inside, I heard it answer not in words, but in feeling. Yes, we did.